Hey guys, it's Rebecca from alltapestrycrochet.com, and this is the 10th video of the Tapestry Crochet for Beginners series. In this video, I'm going to go over how to make and use an abbreviated graph. An abbreviated graph is the most shortened portion of a pattern that, when repeated over and over again, makes up the whole pattern. It's useful for easily figuring out how many stitches you need for your base or your foundation chain, and it's also much easier to follow an abbreviated graph than it is to follow the larger pattern. This is what a full pattern looks like. This is how I'll present it to you, either on Facebook, on my website, on Pinterest, etc. While this is a better visual representation of what the finished project will actually look like, it's not as useful as an abbreviated graph is. This is an abbreviated graph. If you took this graph here and you repeated it 3 times across from left to right, and 2 times from bottom to top, it'll form the full pattern that you saw in the last slide. Let's test it out. You see how that worked? So how do you make an abbreviated graph? Abbreviated graphs are really easy to make. Occasionally they may be provided along with the full graph, but if not, here's how you make them. First, pick a point on the graph that's easy to recognize. Second, find the matching points. Find 2 matching points, one in the same round and one in the same column. And then, using those points, isolate it. Let me give you these instructions in more detail. Step 1 would be to pick a point on the graph. Picking a point that's easy to recognize will make the process of making an abbreviated graph and the process of crocheting a lot easier. I went with this stitch right here. I thought this was a good stitch to choose because it's at the bottom of this L shape here, which to me is a very recognizable shape. The next step is to find the first matching point. Find the nearest matching point in the same row, or in other words, in the same round. So if you go from this point here and you go along the round, you'll stop whenever you see the same point. So this point is the same point because it is the bottom left-hand corner of this L shape here. Step 3 is to find the second matching point. Find the nearest matching point within the same column. So from this point here, we're going to work our way up until we find the point that matches that first point. And we find it right here. Step 4 is to isolate it. Draw a box using these points as your guide. Include the starting point within your box, but be sure that you leave the matching points, the purple ones, out of the box, like this. See how the matching points are just barely outside of this box here. Including the matching points in your abbreviated graph would lead you to crocheting the same round twice in a row and at some point the same stitch twice in a row. In other words, it would mess up your pattern. So now that we have the box drawn, let's go ahead and get rid of everything around it. This is your abbreviated graph. Using this, you can figure out how many stitches it takes to complete one repetition of the pattern. Basically, you would just count the stitches that it takes to get from right to left. The steps are more or less the same for graphs using a regular single crochet, but the process will look a little bit different. Step 1 is once again to pick a point. Be sure that you're choosing a point that's easily recognizable. I chose this point here because it's at the top of this small triangle shape. Step 2 would be to find the first matching point within the same round. So moving from this stitch here, we go along until we find the first matching point, which is this one here, and we have it circled. Now normally the next step would be to find the first matching point within the same column. So using this one as your starting point, you would want to find the matching point within the column. Now with a modified single crochet stitch, the column will go straight up and down vertically, but with the regular single crochet stitch, that column will follow this diagonal line here. So starting from this black point, we would move up to this white point here, and then this red point, and then this white point, and then the red one, and you would just continue to follow it. Now if you're not being careful, you may think that this black point right here would be within the same column of this black point here, and it definitely is the same point in the pattern, but it is not within the same column. If you follow this line very, very carefully, you'll see that this is actually the point that is within the same column as the starting point, and this point right here falls just outside of it. So it's still not the first matching point within the same column. So if we continue to go up, what you'll notice is that this point here that is apparently the matching point still does not fall in the within the column, and it actually is getting further away from being in the same column as this point here. So when this happens, when you can't find a matching point in the same column on the graph, it's really not a problem. The most important thing is that you're able to find a matching point within the same round. If you don't have a matching point within the same column, you'll still be able to make an abbreviated graph that will work for any project. So let's move on to step 3. Step 3 is to draw a box, or in this case it would just be 2 parallel lines. Once again, you want to remember to include the starting point within the box, but not to include the matching point. Be sure that when you're drawing these lines, you follow this diagonal line as your guide, and you draw the line right outside of that. So here's the starting point, and all of these points, these red and white points, are all within this same diagonal line, and your box is going to sit just outside of that. On the other side, with your matching point, you want the line to sit on the left of that point as well, so that you're not including the matching point or anything within its diagonal line. Step 4 is to isolate it. So using this box, we're going to get rid of everything to the left and to the right of it. When we do that, we're going to exclude the matching point, and that is exactly what you want to do, because once again, if you included the matching point, basically you would do the pattern, and then once you got to this point here, you would end up repeating it again right here. So you need to leave that out to make sure that you complete the pattern correctly. So let's go ahead and isolate it. And what we have right here is that starting point. The matching point would have been right here. So let's go ahead and put a few of these abbreviated graphs together and just double check that it works out correctly. Yep, and this is basically a replication of that original pattern. So that's how you know that the abbreviated graph is going to work correctly. Now let's talk about how to actually use an abbreviated graph. I believe I've mentioned it before in another video, but just once again as a reminder, these graphs are intended to be used in the round. I suppose you may be able to use these ones using a modified single crochet for flat tapestry crochet, but in general I'm talking about using them in the round, and especially this one. For the pattern that uses a regular single crochet stitch, I ended up just cutting out about half of that abbreviated graph just so that we could take a closer look at it. And I numbered it along the bottom here. For this one, there are too many, so I just left the numbering out. But this is basically, it would be 1 to 29. This pattern here, using a regular single crochet stitch, goes from 1 to 13. So using this information, you can find out how many stitches to have in your foundation chain or in the last round of your base. And I'll go over that information in more detail in the next video. But just for an example, let's say you wanted to repeat this pattern 10 times. You would take the number of stitches it takes to get from right to left of this abbreviated graph, which is 13, and you would multiply that by 10, which would give you a total of 130 stitches. So from that, you know that in your foundation chain, you need to have 130 stitches. So let's say you just completed that foundation chain of 130 stitches. Once you're ready to begin round 1, you would start with 1 white single crochet stitch into the first space. Into the next space, you would do 1 red single crochet. Into the next stitch, you would do a black single crochet, and into the one after that, you would do another black, and then white, 2 reds, 1 white, 2 blacks, 1 red, 1 white, and 1 black. After completing this last black stitch here, you would go back to the beginning of the first row, and you would complete it again from right to left, and you would continue to do that until you've repeated the first row 10 times. Once you've completed the first row 10 times, you'll move up to the second row here, and once again you will repeat that row 10 times from right to left. And you'll just continue to do that row after row, round after round, until you've reached a good size for your project. Or you could do the process the opposite way around. So let's say you do a foundation chain in order to fit the width of, say, a laptop so that you can make a laptop cover. And for convenience sake, let's say that after completing that foundation chain to match the width of your laptop, you come up with 130 stitches in your foundation chain. And if you wanted to use the pattern on the left that takes 13 stitches to complete, you would just take 130, which is the number of stitches in the foundation chain, and divide it by 13, which is the number of stitches that it takes to complete the abbreviated graph, and that would give you 10, which is the number of times that you would have to repeat that pattern in order for it to fit your foundation chain. Now I know that there are going to be plenty of times when it's not going to work out as nicely as it did in this example. Most times the number of stitches that it takes to complete an abbreviated graph is not going to divide evenly into the number of stitches in your foundation chain. In the next video, I'll go over my methods of dealing with that problem. But for now, let's go ahead and wrap up this tutorial. That is pretty much all that you need to know about abbreviated graphs for now. I'll be talking about abbreviated graphs a little bit more in the next video. And just to let you guys know, the next video will be the last video in the Tapestry Crochet for Beginners series. I'll definitely continue to make how-to videos about tapestry crochet, but at least for the beginner stages, that's pretty much all that you need to know to get started and to successfully complete any project. Please remember that if you have any questions at all, I really love to help you guys out, so please feel free to leave your questions, comments, or suggestions in the comment section below, or you could message me directly on the All Tapestry Crochet Facebook page, and you could also look for answers in one of the many free tutorials on alltapestrycrochet.com. I wish the very best of luck to you all, and happy crocheting!